When Urano Motosu woke up in the body of the frail 5-year-old Mine, she found herself in for a few rude awakenings about the reality of her new situation. The world she found herself in was extremely different from her original world, and not in a good way. Or at least, that's what it felt like at first. Living in a medieval-esque world with a totally different language and culture than her own proved to be a challenge, and Mine was often met with severe culture shock about the many things that were considered normal in her new world, but which to her just didn't make sense. However, Mine adapted relatively quickly, and as the story progresses, she learned to successfully navigate both the commoner and the noble's fears, and we as readers get to learn all about the intriguing world of Ascendance of a Bookworm. One of the most fascinating things that we learn more about as the story progresses are the social customs around courtship and marriage. After all, in the Bookworm world, who gets to marry who is less dependent on love than it is on one's career, social status, connections, and, in the case of the nobility, mana compatibility. Today we will talk all about love and marriage in the Bookworm world. But before we begin, please note that there will be several light novel spoilers, so if you have only watched the anime, go and read the light novel first. Trust me, you will thank me later. While Ascendance of a Bookworm is not a romance story, we do encounter many characters who are either courting someone, are happily married, or, in the case of one beloved character, are struggling to find someone to marry. As such, we get many glimpses of how courtship and marriage work both for commoners and nobles in this world. Young men and women are considered adults after they turn 15, and they may marry once they come of age. However, preparing for marriage starts long before they reach adulthood. As early as the first volume, we learn that commoner women have to not just be strong and healthy, but they must also be skilled homemakers. For women of lower status, this is particularly important since there are no stores that sell ready-made clothing. Girls learn from their mothers how to make and mend clothes for their family, as well as other things that are needed around the home. Therefore, a wise mother will encourage her daughters to learn how to weave, sew, cook, and so on from very early on. At some point in the beginning of the story, Aoife tells Mine that a woman is only considered to be a true beauty if she is good at sewing and cooking, and as Mine was too weak to do any household chores, she decided early on that she would never become a true sewing beauty, and so she would probably never marry. And while women also can work outside of the home and even own businesses, men are considered the main providers and the protectors of the family. They must have a decent job and good prospects in order to attract a mate. Typically, men get married in their early 20s so that they have time to save money for marriage, while women will marry before or at around 20 years of age. Because of this, it is common for the husband to be 3 to 10 years older than his wife, and it is rare for the woman to be the older one. While love marriages can happen, it is exceedingly rare for love to be the only consideration for marriage. For the most part, the main factor is compatibility. Can we work together? Will we make a good partnership? Family and employment connections are supremely important in this regard, which is why for commoners and aristocrats alike, it is normal for a boy or a girl's parents to choose a marriage partner for their child. In the case of the commoner merchant class, marriages are considered more as business partnerships, where different stores form important connections through marriage that will help strengthen each other's stores and businesses. It is almost impossible to marry too high up since the dowries that the parents must prepare are according to the social status. So for example, if a girl who is the daughter of a soldier were to marry into a merchant class, her family might end up bankrupt trying to come up with a suitable dowry to satisfy the other family. And if a boy from a poorer background wanted to marry into the merchant class, he'd be hard-pressed to find a girl who would be willing to marry someone who came from the slums and who has no business connections, no matter how hardworking he might be. In addition, not only do they have to think about the dowry, but in the future, when they have children and their families gather together to celebrate things like births, baptisms, and so on, the family of the poorer person would be forced to contribute at a level on par with the richer family. For this reason, marrying out of one's social status is very rare. In general, women end up marrying men who are in the same line of work as their fathers or who are connected to her family in some form. And while this promotes a level of social stability and order, this also leads to stagnant social growth and makes upward social mobility close to impossible. Once marriage talks take place and everyone is in agreement about the dowry and other things, the couple gets engaged in the presence of both their families. The engagement ceremony itself is done at home and involves the boy, the girl, and their fathers. First, the men take turns to pour some wine into a wooden cup. It is said that the sound of the wine on the cup is the sign of the promise that they make. The girl's father then takes a drink from the cup and says some words to the boy like, "Take care of my daughter," or something similar. Then the boy also says some words in response before also drinking from the cup. In this way, the engagement is established between the couple. Once a couple is engaged and they approach the time of their marriage, they begin thinking of setting up their own homes. In the city, young people must hurry to find a place to live before all the available places are taken up. Though in the case of those who are lucky enough to have posts in large stores which have their own buildings, they can simply rent and live in one of the upper floors of their company's building. After the engagement period, the couple can get married during the star binding ceremony. In the city, weddings are held once a year in midsummer, and everyone who wants to get married gets married on the same day. In Ehrenfest specifically, the event is an occasion for a citywide celebration called the Star Festival. On that day, the young couples who are to be married go to the temple to be blessed by the high priest, while everyone else goes to the forest to look for tao fruit. As the newlyweds emerge from the temple into the central plaza, their friends and neighbors throw the gathered tao fruit at them, and the married couples run through the streets trying to dodge the fruit. It's a chance for husbands to show off how well they can protect their wives by trying to defend them from getting wet. While bitter singles who fail to find a partner and get married that year vent their frustrations by throwing as many tao fruit as possible at all the happy couples. Afterwards, the kids go home while the party continues on until after dark. People continue to celebrate the newlyweds, and singles look for romantic partners. In the towns and districts outside of Ehrenfest City, marriages also take place once a year, but they are held in the autumn during the harvest festival when everyone is gathered from the outlying farms and villages. The ceremony is officiated by the priests who travel around Ehrenfest and who also perform baptisms and coming-of-age ceremonies at that time, making it a festive occasion for almost everyone. As you can see, even for commoners, marriage isn't as simple as finding someone who likes you back. Still, that doesn't mean that we don't get to see couples who are very loving and romantic. Some of the fan favorite couples from the lower city are those in which there was love involved, like Otto and Karina, and Gunther and Aoife. But Otto had to fulfill some very important and very costly requirements before Karina would even consider marrying him. And his success was also owed in part because Karina's marriage prospects at the time were not favorable due to a feud with the guildmaster. And in the case of Gunther and Aoife, it just so happened that Aoife's father and Gunther were in the same profession, so it just made practical sense that the two marry. The cherry on top, however, was the extent of Gunther's love for Aoife and her reciprocating his feelings. Still, in both cases, love alone wasn't the only consideration when it came to marriage. And if this is the case for commoner marriages in the bookworm world, this is doubly so for noble marriages. In nobility, young men and women are considered adults after they graduate from the Royal Academy, which is typically after they turn 15 years old. And much like the commoners, they must also find a marriage partner that meets several important criteria. Noble marriages are used to strengthen bonds with other families or form important political alliances. Therefore, the things that matter the most in a potential mate is their status, fortune, faction, and most importantly, mana compatibility. A couple must have similar mana levels to marry and have kids. We learn as much early in part 2. It is for this reason that nobles and manaless commoners can never marry. Not only would there be insurmountable social barriers that they would need to overcome, but they would also be unable to have children. Because the mana issue is so important, once nobles hit puberty, they develop the ability to sense other people's mana. This ability helps people with mana know if the other person is compatible to them. If they can't feel another person's mana, it means that either the other person hasn't developed mana sensing yet, which makes them still too young to be considered for marriage, or they simply have too much or too little mana and they might have great difficulty having children together. Because a potential spouse must meet so many requirements, it is not uncommon for parents to choose their child's potential mate. Young nobles may also find their own partner during their time in the Royal Academy and may even marry someone from a different duchy, though this is largely dependent on getting permission from their families and, most importantly, from the archdukes or obs of their respective duchies. Failing that, they can also look for someone once they have come of age and are back at home during the night of the Starbind ceremony. Noble society is rigidly structured and constrained by propriety and status. For example, physical contact, however innocent, is forbidden, and euphemistic language is used aplenty to speak about things like kissing and so on. But young nobles have their own ways to court someone. It all begins with one or the other expressing their interest. A girl can bring up the subject herself by giving the boy she likes a handkerchief that she embroidered herself to show off her talent in embroidery. This is not to prove themselves as good homemakers like the commoners, but rather this is to show that they can embroider protective magic circles, a crucial task that only wives can do for a man, since the closer or the more similar their mana is, the more effective the magic protective circles will be. As for the boys, they can simply express their interest by asking a girl to embroider their cape for them. As a special case in 𝙏𝙼𝙖𝙠, girls who have their hearts on someone may take matters into their own hands and use force to get what they want. They will push a man to the ground at knife point and demand that the man give them a task, and if she is successful in the task, then they will become a couple. 𝙏𝙼𝙠 boys, on the other hand, may issue challenges to the romantic rivals instead, and will play bride-stealing dither for the girl that they want. There are a few things couples will do when they are courting. They may gift each other courtship face stones, they may ride together on each other's high beasts, they may sneak away and spend some alone time in the famous gazebo of the Goddess of Time in the Royal Academy, and if they are feeling particularly frisky, they may actually hold hands. Holding hands for nobility is a particularly risque act, since gathering mana in one's hand and transferring it to the other person can be considered an act of foreplay. Finally, once nobles graduate, they are generally escorted by their partner. Unfortunately, if a noble hasn't found someone by graduation, they will have to get escorted by an older family member. And speaking of graduation, this ceremony is not only meant as a sign that one got through all of the curriculum required for a noble to learn while at school. This is also a coming-of-age ceremony, signifying their true debut as a noble. And girls, now young women, will wear their hair up, a sign that they have reached marriageable age. Because mana is so important in a successful union, the families of the courting couple need to have a color matching ceremony. The color matching ceremony is performed to show to all the relatives present that the magic power of both matches and that their mana and attributes are compatible and will mix well. For this, they use a special tool onto which both the man and the woman will pour in some of their mana. From there on, they can literally see the mana mixing in front of their eyes. The one with the strongest mana levels might occupy a larger area on the magic tool, but their mana must meet within a matching range, and where the mana overlaps, it must successfully merge. Color matching ceremonies are so crucial that up to 3 such color matching ceremonies may take place before the engagement is finalized. Once marriage talks take place and everyone is in agreement, the couple gets engaged in the presence of both their families. The engagement ceremony involves the trading of face stones. The engagement ceremony is an occasion where friends and family throw a large party to celebrate the soon-to-be married couple. If the noble couple's families are affluent, it will be a day just for the two of them. However, for families that are not so well off, they will typically have a day in which several other couples in their family that also wish to have their ceremony will gather so that they can have their engagement ceremonies at the same time. This is also the case with color matching ceremonies. In contrast to the Western practice where the man gives a ring to the woman as a sign of their engagement, in the bookworm world both the man and the woman prepare face stone necklaces to give to each other. These must be made with the highest quality magic stones possible. They must be dyed with their own magic and should include all the elements necessary to match the other's mana attributes. These stones have a magically engraved message on it which are considered to be similar to our own wedding vows and promises. Both parties present their face stones to each other while reciting poems and using, of course, all kinds of euphemisms full of the names of the gods. The necklaces have an additional practical use to them. As one wears a courtship or engagement face stone that is full of their partner's mana, their body begins to absorb and get used to the partner's mana in preparation for their eventual union when the husband and wife will mix their mana completely. Because of the nature of some face stones and amulets, it is frowned upon for a woman to wear face stone ornaments and amulets made by people other than her own parents, since the mana within them may seep into her body. Once a man begins courting her, she can look forward to slowly replacing all the amulets and face stones that contain her parents' mana with face stones and amulets that contain her soon-to-be husband's mana. A very jealous suitor may cover his beloved in jewelry, whether magical or not, and it is said that he, like the god of life who encases scheduled in ice, is similarly displaying a possessive nature to his attachment. Depending on how compatible their mana is, the charms themselves might feel uncomfortable to the woman wearing them. If for some reason the engagement falls through, the necklace is removed. People do not keep engagement face stones, and they certainly do not continue to wear them. Engagements typically last about a year and are followed by a starbind ceremony. In Ehrenfest, weddings are always held once a year and the same day as the commoner weddings, except that noble marriages take place in the Archduke's castle and are at night, when it is said the god of darkness can give the biggest blessings on the couples. For archdukes and royalty, however, weddings take place in the spring during the Archduke Conference. They also take place at noon rather than at night. During this time, no vows are exchanged. The couples simply step forward when called, they confirm that they want to be married, and each sign a magic contract before they all receive a blessing from the High Bishop. In the case of people who marry in from another duchy, the family members all meet at the border gate to give away their child, and, save for a few exceptions, the wedding takes place during the starbind ceremony along with all the others. Because marriages are a way to form important political unions and have more children, the more affluent nobles, that is, those of the archnoble status and above, may marry second or third wives, to either balance out factions because the first wife cannot have children, or for the purpose of increasing the number of family members to supply mana to the foundation. They may also have concubines and mistresses. This arrangement works as long as each wife is given her own place and mansion for her and her children to live in, with the first wife and her children being higher in status. And speaking of weird and noble customs that just run contrary to our own modern-day sensibilities, there is the fact that a man can legally marry his half-sister so long as they don't have the same mother. This is technically not incestuous, at least to them, since children primarily inherit the mother's mana and attributes, so having a different mother makes everything a-okay. This all goes as further evidence to show that the values that are ingrained in noble society, where love and romance take a back seat in favor of other more practical considerations, is vastly different to ours. And if two people who fall in love also happen to check each other's boxes, and their families all approve, and their mana and status is compatible, and if they aren't somehow ripped apart by circumstances beyond their control, well, then they are very lucky indeed. In order for couples to consummate their marriage successfully, they must dye each other using a synchronizing potion before they go to bed. This potion makes mana mixing and conception much easier. These potions will typically taste better the closer the couples are to each other's mana. Usually it is expected that they might not taste good at all. The synchronizing potion has other uses that are not related to marriage, such as when synchronizing minds using the mind reading tool, but its main purpose is for couples to be together. One final bit of world-building lore that must be taken into consideration when talking about romance among nobility is the dedication of one's name. Name swearing is the process of sealing your name into a face stone and then offering it to someone, thereby giving them your life and swearing complete loyalty to them. This practice is used, and often misused, for a variety of reasons. In its proper context, it is meant to be the ultimate sign of devotion, trust, and even love. In the light novel, name swearing is not necessarily done for romantic reasons. However, as one of Rosamine's noble retainers pointed out, to give one's name to one's dearest and receive theirs in turn forms an eternal vow of everlasting love. However, it is not a realistic practice. While two people might name swear themselves to each other, it is ultimately seen as risky and is seldom practiced since, if one were to die, so would the other. One of the first noble couples we are introduced to is Karsted and Elvira. Out of all noble couples we meet, they seem to have the most atypical relationship, with faction infighting between the first, second, and third wives. Elvira, as first wife, is forced to take sides in the domestic dispute between the other two wives, while Karsted's obvious preference to the third wife only worked to sow more domestic discord. Sylvester and Florencia, on the other hand, are a monogamous couple, yet their unique relationship is also fraught with its own challenges. First, there is the issue with the problematic mother-in-law who stripped her daughter-in-law of authority and took over the education and upbringing of their firstborn son. Next, Sylvester's assertions that he only wants or needs his wife Florencia, while romantic, actually is problematic, because this only places a huge burden on the few people who can supply mana to the foundation. An archduke like him needs to have multiple wives so that there can be more family members and children who can help sustain the duchy. For an ob, stubbornly maintaining a monogamous marriage is definitely not a wise course of action. Finally, we have one of those couples whose love we all wanted to see come to fruition but ultimately failed. The case of Damiel and Brigitte is a prime example of how love alone is not enough to make a relationship work. Sure, Daniel worked very hard over the course of a year to do the impossible and match mana levels with Brigitte, yet they both failed to agree on the practicalities of their future life that were as basic as where are we gonna live after we get married, among other things. Marriage in the Bookworm world is far from simple. Whether they be commoner or noble, couples have to take many things into consideration before tying the knot. And unfortunately, love alone is not enough. Yet for every Hugo whose long-distance relationship failed, for every Daniel who turned down the chance to rise in status and marry the woman he loved because of duty, and for every Brigitte who is seen as damaged goods after breaking her engagement with a cad, there is a plethora of other couples who, over the course of the story, overcome their challenges and do what it takes to win the one that they love. From toiling for months to earn the money necessary to buy the other's freedom, to giving up their claim to the throne for the sake of the woman they love. Those who seem the most hopeless can, and do, get their own happily ever after. Which is why I believe that while Ascendance of a Bookworm is not a romance, love in all its forms takes center stage in this story and is triumphant in the end. And that just makes the romantic in me so incredibly happy.